Hi, and welcome to this introduction to Cassette from Waves Factory, which gives you all the cool character of the compact cassette in convenient plug-in format. This gorgeous-looking interface is resizable to suit any type of display, and looks like you could reach out and grab the tape out of your monitor. But it's also highly functional and intuitive to use, with presets and high-level controls available on the front panel, plus full tweakability behind the scenes. Let's start with the input gain. This is compensated at the output, so it's really easy to judge how hard to drive the tape. You can push it into compression or saturation or obvious distortion. Or you can pull the level right down and bury the signal in the noise floor. We're currently using the Pro tape deck model, which emulates an expensive, high-quality machine. By contrast, the Micro model emulates lo-fi machines that were intended mostly for dictation. That's not a subtle difference. So there's also a Home model, which sits between the two and sounds more like a typical mass-market machine. You can also swap the cassette type. It might be tempting to just pick one you like the look of, but in fact these all represent different tape formulations and profoundly affect the sound. The Type 1 ferric tape sounds warm and fluffy, and compresses the high end as you drive it harder. While Type 2 chrome tape sounds bright and slightly thin, and stays bright when driven into distortion. Type 3 ferrochrome tape sounds super warm, no matter how hard you push it. While Type 4 metal tape sounds even brighter than chrome. Both tape type and deck type profoundly affect all the characteristics of the tape. 4 different tape models plus 3 different deck models gives us a dozen very different flavours to choose from, even before we start to tweak the controls at the bottom. Of course, cassettes could be reused, and frequently were. A tape that had been erased and re-recorded half a dozen times would not sound the same as a newly unwrapped blank. So you can set the erasures parameter to 0 to emulate recording to a new blank tape, or turn it up to emulate a tape that's been reused up to 20 times, adding a load of extra character and grunge. Let's switch to process the synth lead parts. Notice the cassette label helpfully displays the track name. You can manipulate the stereo width using the spread knob. All the way down gives you mono. Next to this we find the stability knob, which controls the tape speed fluctuations. If you turn this all the way up, you can emulate a perfect tape deck with no wow and flutter at all. Or turn it all the way down to emulate a deck that's in need of a service with obvious fluctuations in pitch. This is actually a master control. If we switch to the settings panel, the top right section provides detailed control over the depth and rate of the slower wow type fluctuations, or the faster flutter, and the randomness of the fluctuations. Once you've dialed in the character you want, you can switch back to the front panel and dial it back to taste by turning the stability knob back up. Next up we find noise controls. Let's turn up the static noise till it's clearly audible. This obviously has more character than just simple white noise. And in fact, the character changes profoundly if you switch tape type or change the deck. Of course, you can also turn this down. This gives you the freedom to lower the input gain for less compression and saturation, without necessarily ending up buried in the noise floor. The dynamic noise is perhaps more interesting. This models the asperity noise caused by tiny imperfections in the tape surface. Unlike the constant hiss of the static noise, this is related to the audio signal and causes a kind of crunchy, noisy distortion. This can actually sound really good on things like snare drums. And as the noise is different in the left and right channels, it can help to create a sense of stereo width. Okay, so let's try the artifacts knob. And now it sounds like a tape that's been chewed up by a dodgy player, then laboriously spooled back onto the reel with a pencil. The tape sounds like it's full of creases and kinks, and the high frequencies keep disappearing and reappearing. This is actually another master control. Let's open the settings page again, where we find controls for degradation and dropouts. Degradation controls the slower high-frequency fluctuations, and you can fine-tune the speed of these with the rate slider, while dropouts are much faster, up to 20 Hz at the maximum rate setting. Like the wow and flutter settings above, you can tune these to taste. Then scale back the depth of both degradation and dropouts using the artifacts knob on the main panel. There's another control in this section of the settings panel, however, which isn't affected by the artifacts knob. Random snap emulates what happens when the tape sticks momentarily, then frees itself, causing a sudden drop in pitch, followed by a sudden recovery. Turn up the slider for a higher probability and more frequent snaps. If you want more subtlety, you can turn off various aspects of the emulation. Of course, you can set stability to 100% for zero wow and flutter, and turn the artifacts all the way down. But you can also switch to the settings panel and disable the frequency response emulation, or the saturation, or the compression. And you can also adjust the amount of crosstalk between channels. Turn this off to preserve your original stereo image, or turn it up to allow the left channel to bleed into the right and vice versa. The frequency response of the bleed is not flat, so this will narrow high frequencies more than low frequencies, which can sometimes help to make a mix sound more focused with better mono compatibility. The azimuth control allows you to set your virtual playback head at an angle, so it's not quite perpendicular to the tape. This shifts the left or right channel slightly earlier, resulting in comb filtering and a subtle harsh delay effect. Azimuth can provide a more interesting and colourful alternative to panning apart left or right in the usual way. Intermodulation happens when different parts of the signal interact and generate sidebands at sum and difference frequencies. It's generally considered undesirable, but in fact is an inherent part of all non-linear processes like saturation and distortion, and can provide a useful gluing effect in small amounts. As cassette is full of non-linearities which need to behave in an authentically analog way, the oversampling option is turned on by default. But you can turn it off if you need zero latency and don't mind a bit of aliasing. The mix control at the bottom is fairly self-explanatory. You can blend the wet and dry signals to taste as you would expect. But be aware that this usually won't simply tame the effect and make it more subtle. Phase shifts between the wet and dry signals will cause complex changes in frequency response, and any wow and flutter will become a kind of chorus or flanger effect. Okay, I've saved the best for last. The recassette slider allows you to chain together multiple cassette models in series to emulate the sound of a tape that was copied from a tape, that was copied from a tape, and so on, for up to 4 instances. This is equivalent to loading several more instances of cassette with the same settings, so if you're the cautious type, you might want to stop playback first. Then enjoy the gloriously grungy sound of a 4th generation cassette copy. Of course, you might be wondering, why on earth would I ever want to make my mixes sound like they were mastered on a dictaphone? Well, obviously you wouldn't. But the characterful lo-fi sound of cassette can be great for spot effects. Automating the mix control allows you to bring in the cassette sound just for your middle 8 or your intro. Or you can use cassette just for select elements of your mix, and contrast those organic lo-fi tones with cleaner or more full spectrum parts. Because at the end of the day, there's no type of distortion that can't sound good in the right context. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.